Thank you so much. It's just so heartwarming to see so many friends here in the audience today to support the birth of my book baby. That's a common author analogy, and apologies to all women in the audience because I know it's nothing like birthing an actual baby, but it's been 5 years in the making. So thank you for supporting this launch. And this is my friend and colleague Rick Steele, and he will be discussing with me. But I'll go ahead and do a little introduction first. First of all, this is, I just want to give thanks to the space, Manila Town Heritage Foundation, which runs this space, and as many of you know, the I Hotel is right next door, and this is a rather historic location. So to get our sense of place in San Francisco, we can certainly look to the history of this institution and the I Hotel, which about 40 years ago was really birthed the tenants' rights movements. So this is a great thanks that they can support, that we can support them as well by our presence. So as I said, this book has been 5 years in the writing, but the incident which led eventually to the writing of this book happened during a 5-month trip through Asia, which many of you know I took in 2007, traveling from India to Japan, tracing the route of Buddhism, war, and peace throughout Asia, and really trying to come to grips with all of that history, but also really travel to transcendence. I think was kind of my what happened through this trip, trying to gather or kind of merge my soul, I guess, with the cultures of the world, and it was just really an extraordinary trip. In the middle of that trip, something happened, which I'll read to you at the beginning of the book, which eventually led to the instigation of writing this book. I was in the process of writing a travel memoir about that book called Going to Peace, and hopefully that will eventually happen. But as I was writing that, I was about 120,000 words into that, and then I got involved with this thing called Facebook. And it kind of threw me for a loop, and I decided I really had to see what was going on, what was happening to me on this medium, what was happening to our community and our relationships. Because as you'll discover when you read the book, Facebook was such a prominent presence, especially around 2012, and it's still, with 1.8 billion users, it's still a dynamic and large presence for good and bad. Not good or bad, but good and bad. So I wanted to explore all of that. But this book is also an introduction to Buddhism, and it's an exploration of psychological research about social media, and it's also primarily a memoir. So one of the early chapters, which I'll read, is called Hanoi Rooftop, about the moment which really started the process of writing this book. Hanoi Rooftop. Hanoi, a hot summer night, June 2007. I'm almost at the exact halfway point of my 5-month pilgrimage across Asia, tracing the paths of Buddhism, war, and peace from India to Japan. I celebrated Buddha's enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, learned about civil wars in Nepal and Sri Lanka, said prayers for peace and democracy in Burma, marked my 40th birthday at a monastery in Thailand, bore witness to the dead in Cambodia, and am now visiting my friend, the Vietnamese-American writer and journalist Nguyen in Hanoi, nearly 40 years after the middle of the war, which forced his family to leave Vietnam and take refuge in the United States. He recently returned here with his mother in hopes of providing better care for her as she ages with Alzheimer's disease. Moving here was an act of extraordinary filial piety. He left home, work, and friends in San Francisco to do this. I admire his devotion to his mother, his embodiment of Confucian virtue. It seems like self-denial, but he might say it is fulfillment. His family has been uprooted by wars and migrations. He has what my friend, poet Bao Fi, calls a refugeeography. This return to Vietnam is an exercise in completing, or at least continuing, the circle of relationships to mother, birth country, and perhaps, in time, to his own heart, which bears both loss and hope. Perhaps it is a move towards redemption, renewal, and wholeness, not just for himself, but for all the people he represents and to whom he is connected. I'm at the middle of my own journeys across Asia and in life. The movement of the heart, transcending nations and boundaries, appeals to me. I savor this time with him, a dear friend in an unfamiliar land, which he makes familiar to me. Duc seems to live at the fulcrum of expatriate and artist communities in Hanoi. Tonight, we are going to an expat friend's birthday party. Her apartment is on the top floor and opens onto a rooftop where we sit and mingle with expats from around the world, all of them looking for opportunity, adventure, or a kind of asylum in Vietnam, far from their native homes. Wine flows and conversations and laughter echo into a warm, dark night under the stars. A beautiful young woman, Yasue, introduces herself as she sits down next to me. Soon we're immersed in each other's stories. She's Japanese, but grew up in England, and could easily be a Japanese Kate Middleton, complete with British accent. Now she calls Vietnam her home for now. Yasue tells me of family and relationships, past and present. They've been a challenge, to say the least, especially a boyfriend or two. Her loves have been passionate, intense, and even dangerous, taking her to extraordinary vulnerability, where she'd shown her strength, faced down the threat of violence, and transformed the ones who threatened her. The coin of this queen's realm was coolness under fire. Keep calm and relate on. Relationships were messy, but they could be revolutionary. As she discloses difficulties and traumas, my heart opens for her. It seems to be just the two of us here, our friends forgotten in a moonlight spell. It doesn't seem that we've met for the first time, but that we're reunited after lifetimes apart. But even if we didn't know each other before from some enchanted past life, we're new best friends now on this Hanoi rooftop with the stars aligned above us. After a few hours of listening and sharing, I have to leave. Duc gathers me, shooting me a look of bewilderment and perhaps a twinge of jealousy as he mentally compares our evenings. He seems to think I got a bigger slice of the pie tonight. But he has many Hanoi rooftops ahead of him. This is my first and possibly last. Yasue calls out to me as I leave. "Are you on Facebook?" she asks. "What's that?" I ask in return. She says she'll send me an invitation for this Facebook thing, whatever it is. There it begins. All right, so now I'd like to open it up to a conversation with Rick Steele, who is a psychiatrist and teacher, and also a
loudmouth.
A loudmouth, and the former director. He doesn't want me to say this, but the former director of the C.G. Jung Institute in San Francisco. So,
we all make some mistakes. First off, this mic is not working, but first off, I would like to recognize the 5 years of work, blood, sweat, tears, creativity, and love that have gone into this. Rob, congratulations. You don't get to do that. You don't get to do that when you're your own MC.
Thank you, Rick.
The moment you just read us, spoiler alert, has an echo later in the book. And it, for me, made a kind of archway of relatedness through the whole thing. But you say yourself in the introduction that the book is a bricolage. And to me that means an assembly of diverse things that somehow makes a creative whole. Could you comment on that part of Facebuddha?
Sure. Well, I think a bricolage is probably the generous way of putting it, because bricolage is a term used in art, which is basically creating something out of whatever's available, what's at hand. And I think, as I put it in the introduction, this collection of stories and explorations is a bricolage, a collection of different aspects of myself and my journey. I think ourselves are a bricolage, particularly the immigrant experience. I think as I've talked about it with some folks here, our experience as immigrants is largely bricolage. We make do the best we can with whatever's available. And so that's kind of the spirit that I intend that word. But also, I think some people might find the book somewhat episodic and moving from one aspect to another of what I'm exploring. And so that, I guess to be patient with that, and the introduction kind of explains that, but yeah, that's what
Did you have an overarching feeling as you went through this? Did they assemble themselves in some order, or?
I think so, especially after I'm rereading it, and I think it's beginning to grow on me. Yeah, I think so. I think the overall spirit is about transcendence, and that's the theme that kind of pulls everything together for me anyway. So we'll see what my readers have to say.
I have an advantage over almost everyone in the room because I've read the book. I don't remember if it was E.B. White or E.M. Forster writing about writing said, "Remember the reader." Do you have any advice for the reader of Facebuddha? It's a big book.
Yeah, I think just take it at your own pace. And I say in the introduction, there are a couple of chapters which might be a bit challenging if you're not interested in Asian American film. And don't tell me who you are, because you probably won't be in this room. But if you're not interested in Asian American film, or if the doctor-patient relationship is not your interest, then there are a couple of chapters which I say in the introduction you could kind of pass by. But other than that, I skip from psychological research to Buddhism to memoir, and so you'll find that. So just remember those three threads, and you'll figure it out.
Eliot said that there are three conditions: live in the same hedgerow, look alike, yet differ completely. Attachment to self and to things and to persons, detachment from self and from things and from persons, and living between them, indifference, which resembles the others as death resembles life. I can only imagine that writing a book of this magnitude was a Buddhist exercise in calisthenics that you'd never encountered before. How about the attachment and detachment going through a process like this?
Well, I think, boy, that's a question.
I don't want to talk. I want you to talk.
You want me to scratch my head for a while? So I think the process of writing is, there may be writers in the room, involves really kind of losing yourself in your words and just forgetting about. I think to study the self is to forget the self, and so I think writing is a process of trying to understand the self, but also let go of the self. And so I think you'll see that in the book. Maybe the attachments and I kind of make fun of myself for some of my attachments, and then also kind of trying to, as you read in that first paragraph, my feeling of trying to kind of unite with the bigger story of life and kind of lose myself in that. So, yeah.
And, I was thinking actually of the production of the book itself too. That is a material process in the world that cannot proceed without significant attachment, correct?
Well, yes, but actually, I think it's getting better. I'm feeling comfortably, but not painfully attached to my book. I hope many people read it and it starts conversations. But you notice. Part of the Buddhist practice is just to notice what comes up as you proceed in life. The frustrations of marketing or getting the word out or reactivating Facebook, and in order to do that, and then just again finding some things which are not so easy to do, And so I think you know one kind of summary of Buddhist practice is let go. So I think that's the process that I'm trying to do, to be gently attached to my product in the world, but also let it have its own life and see where it goes. So trying not to get caught up. Yeah.
You sure that's all you have to say on that, huh? What you chose to read tonight is a kind of aliquot, sort of essentially perfect relatedness. Like it stands as such a good example of what you say throughout the book. You must use the word relationship 20 dozen times in the book. Give this as an ideal. Can you help us see where relationship really operates in the quotidian world, the less ideal, the less Hanoi rooftop, the sort of day-to-day? Can you comment on that?
Well, I think it's just about caring and being kind to people and listening. And I think that's...
How do you see it in your day-to-day life, and how might we look for that?
Oh, well, I think probably everyone here in this room has some story about that, but I think it's just being present, really, and that's the two wings of the bird for Buddhism are mindfulness and compassion. So being mindful, being present with whoever you're with, and being compassionate. And I think both of those get a bit frustrated with the online experience, which is the big divide, which I write about in the book. But so bringing mindfulness and compassion, and certainly we both do that in our work, and every mental health professional here does that as well. So yeah,
no, certainly in our work. I'm just thinking when I graze through Starbucks and wink appropriately at the barista, if they smile. Is that relatedness in the way you're talking? It seems so trivial compared to the Hanoi rooftop.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You might have something to say about that, but I think in the playful way that we all kind of get along, kind of making eye contact and smiling at people and just connecting. I think that's kind of the basic rule beyond Buddhism. I mean, isn't that zest of life and connection kind of the basic ultimate human religion, which predates everything? Which is the reason why we're all here, is because we managed to care for each other for 150,000 plus years. And so I think, sure, all of that's the zest of life and what we should enjoy, not to spend our lives behind screens, I think, ultimately.
Got a lot of faces showed up here tonight, didn't they?
Absolutely so, yes.
This must be a very good example of what I'm asking about. The online community walks the line of community versus individuality kind of delicately, and with a lifetime in psychoanalysis, I'm so committed to individuality. I see the pressure in Facebook, well, I don't use Facebook, forgive me, but in social media to conform. So individuation versus conformity. Can you kind of run this down through some of what you've learned about Facebook?
Yeah, well, I think some people view Facebook and social media as a way to express their identity and to explore themselves by posting, for example, selfies in a variety of shape and form and using it almost as artistic expression, kind of like Cindy Sherman does or something like that. So I guess some people would say it's a curio for the exploration of self. But I think we're all I think even in real life we are both expressing individuality and also commonality with others, and the extreme of commonality is conformity, and so I think that's something that I notice online is that what propagates most for good and bad are kind of specific interests. Specific kind of beacons of identity, whether it's about racism or sexism, and those are the calling sirens, or not the sirens, but the beacons of identity, and those tend to organize people and propagate very well, and especially anger. Anger is very prolific on social media, and so the question is, then kind of how do you relate to that? Can we only kind of gather as a community in anger, or what? I mean, so that's just one of the questions that I take up. But yeah, I mean, I think the danger is that we that in a community there becomes some conformity, and that any questioning of that, even good-natured questioning, is not really tolerated, is shunned, is not really heard. When we're talking in person, we're always, at our best, I think, trying to listen and hear and validate different points of view. And so we have this bricolage sense of ourselves, which might contain contradictions, which do contain contradictions.
You're actually moving towards my next question, which is to do with the capacity of social media to either support or undermine true ambivalence. I mean, all narrative consciousness is truly ambivalent from my humble point of view. And it seems to me what you were saying about anger gets at this, that it's much easier to have a two-dimensional world online.
I think so. It's there's a Buddhist saying, the world is divided into those who are right. And so if we all get, and this
you mean I'm alone over here?
This is a reason that I deactivated my Facebook account originally 2.5 years ago, was because I felt like I was getting too attached to my opinion about certain things, and other people were just very attached to their opinions. And then how do you have a conversation? How do you recognize ambivalence, really, and rather than just I'm sure we've all had discussions with people who are just very black and white in their thinking, or and we can all become that way when we get attached to our opinions, especially online.
I bet you've seen some of that in responses to your blogs.
Oh, well, sure. I mean, I think anytime I write about anything approaching racism or sexism, I tend to, I mean, there are some trolling comments which are very, negative. So that happens, but not so much to me. I know there are other people who have encountered ridiculous amounts of trouble with that. So yeah, I mean, any quick glance at Twitter will show you how some people become very sadistic about their opinions.
And yet there's a forum for subtlety and ambivalence as well.
Online?
Online.
I don't know. I haven't found it. Subtlety and ambivalence online. The Subtlety Network. I don't think it gets too many shares. Maybe, yeah.
It's very quiet share.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen it. But if somebody wants to invent that, maybe that could be the next Facebook.
I got some Greek in this question.
Oh, no.
The ancient Greeks had two words for notoriety, time and kleos. Time refers to the visible signs of...
Visible what?
Visible signs of success or accomplishment. Like when you think of online profiles and everybody loves sunsets, hiking, and drives a Subaru. And kleos. Kleos is what people say about you when you're not present. It seems to me, as a naive person, that the social media lend themselves tremendously to time, but kind of leave kleos in the shadow. But I could be misguided.
Yeah, I think social media is kind of a display, right? And people display whatever they wish, and that's fine. I mean, I've seen plenty of examples of character and really heartwarming stories, and people sharing tribulations as well. That can happen online. So I'm not saying that social media is all bad, but I think the worst is what one of my patients called it success theater. And so people show their highlights, the highlight reel, the things which, being on, getting an award, or, I mean, that's all fine. But, showing great pictures of themselves on vacation and all this, and that's fine. That's fine to some extent. But you know, I always say the juxtaposition is you're looking at all their great pictures, their highlight reel, their success theater, while you're at home in your pajamas. So you always feel like a loser in comparison.
Feeling fat.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's I mean, you know, there's on Instagram, there's this trend called the Fitspiration images, which is people working out, you know, so, you know, I call it fit shaming. So, you know, if I want to do that, I'll go walk Venice Beach or something, you know.
You know how to feel ashamed.
Yes, exactly.
I think you touched on some of the studies, but particularly social ones. But do we have a neurophysiology of compassion?
Wow. All right. Well, I might turn it over to one of our
transition questions here.
Yeah. I think this is being actively researched right now, but there are areas of the brain that are related to mindfulness, the experiential self. We have mirror neurons, as you well know, and which are literally how our brain kind of echoes what we see others experiencing. And so I think that's thought to be the kind of the foundation of compassion.
All right.
Yeah.
Comments from the floor?
Yeah. Anybody? Alan?
Do you meditate every day?
I do.
How long do you meditate?
45 minutes typically. Yes, in the morning.
Pour coffee?
With coffee.
Meditate with your eyes open?
Usually open, yes. And sometimes with a guided, but usually just by myself, yes.
You use visualization or you just watch your mind?
I just watch my mind mostly, yeah. Yeah. So,
I really only got one more question. It grows out of an experience I had last week with a colleague who happens to be present. I was going on about tonight's presentation and sort of saying that I was Facebook naive because I didn't have a Facebook page, and what about that? And he said, oh, you don't know. And he searched it, and I do have a Facebook page. I never have signed up for Facebook. It has my correct office address from a year and a half ago, but not my current address. I feel deeply ambivalent about this. I need you and the audience to instruct me whether to go forward. I'm very obsessive in my defenses, and I want to correct that old address, but I have a feeling it's a slippery slope.
well, first of all, I wonder who created that Facebook profile. Was it a former patient? A colleague? Was it Facebook itself?
I thought Mark Zuckerberg was feeling jealous.
Well, there are things called dark profiles, which aren't actually Facebook pages, but they collect information about everybody. And with the goal of eventually getting everybody onto Facebook. So that may be where this sprang from, or they may have pulled some business listing, I suppose. But these dark profiles are created from your friends' contact lists, and they get information about you and then ask your friends to invite you to join Facebook, and they send you invitations to say, oh, your friends are on Facebook, don't you want to see what so-and-so is up to? So that's what the dark profile is for. I don't know if that's where that came from, but should you join Facebook? Well, you can write your book after you have a year-long experience with it. Yeah.
I don't know if I can take that on. I was just looking for guidance from the audience. I'm 74. I don't have any grandchildren. I have a dog. I have any number of friends and former students. Should I have a Facebook profile? Should I get on there?
No.
Whoa! I got one strong no.
We have one no. Anybody else? I'm hearing several no's in the audience.
Well, we'll speak afterwards, or we'll take these questions. I want to be clear about the danger I'm exposing myself to even reading this book. Incidentally, the book is very long.
412 pages, 111 notes.
Read and enjoy.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah. You have anything more? Or,
I'm good.
Okay. All right.
Take questions from the audience, or?
Yeah, sure, we could. We could take some questions. I could also just kind of describe a little bit more about maybe the process. Like I said, I've been writing it for about 5 years, and I described that. I had an agent for this book until unfortunately his family member had an illness and he had to drop out of the business, and I started writing another book. and thought I would try to sell that first. That didn't work out. So earlier this year, about 6-7 months ago, I decided to go ahead and self-publish because I didn't want to wait 2 years. So that's why I felt like the time is right. And as we're seeing now, Facebook is always in the news. And most recently, we've had both the good and hopefully the positive as well. The positive, the spreading of messages are raising alarms and solidarity around issues of sexual harassment and abuse. So I think that's, overall a very positive development and potential. But then we also have the possibility that it's negatively influenced many of us, or many people out there in the country with the Russian ad buying scandal and so forth. So this is a huge, Facebook is larger than the Catholic Church. It's larger than any country on earth. So it has a big influence. And I think, the medium is the message. So this is what we really have to pay attention to is, as the question that I took up early in the book was, how is this affecting me? What's the effect on my relationships and on my community? And how can I be more mindful about that? And where do I want to place my feet? Where do I want to place my intentions in the world? And so that just led to a deepening of experience in the world and also a more reflective experience with my time on Facebook. So I hope people enjoy my exploration. But we can turn it over to questions. I see you have a question.
Ravi, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, so good to see you.
I'm delighted. And I would like you to imagine that Mark Zuckerberg is in the audience tonight.
Okay.
Okay, you see where this is going?
Uh-huh.
And because, in some ways we treat Facebook like this monolith, and I would like to think that, no one, but I would like to think that if Zuckerberg is serious about being part of a positive force in an evolving cultural consciousness, he's going to seek out people, sort of like the Dalai Lama bringing neuroscientists to Dharma Salon, So Mark Zuckerberg, we're in the audience tonight. What would you tell him and what would you exhort him to do from this perspective?
Boy, that's a great question. So if Mark Zuckerberg was here, what would I tell him to do? Wow, I don't know. I think I would like to engage with him about this idea. He dreamed up this thing, which has become so prevalent when he was a college student. And what does a college student know about relationship, know about community, know about the world? It's just mind-boggling that he created an app that has affected the entire world. So I think I first of all would congratulate him with his achievement, and appreciate that it's not an all bad force. Nothing is all good or all bad. So I would appreciate him for the positive things that he's done, but also I know Facebook, as I described, has a compassion team. They're trying to make interactions more empathic and more considered, but the whole goal is that you stay on Facebook longer, you click on ads, and that's ultimately it's about monetization of relationship. Now maybe you would say that's a cynical view, we're really about connecting people and all of this, but he wants to expand the internet throughout the world, but the goal is first to get Facebook on everybody's phone, I think I have trouble with the idea that Facebook is a purely democratizing force, and I think he has to really. The first thing is already the first comment, the first social comment is already making waves about how social media influences people, and I think that's the message: is that we're really online, we're really geared towards gravitating towards those hot places, the places where we get angry, where we're polarized. We came into Facebook already very polarized, but it's gotten worse. And trust is at an all-time low in this country. Millennials only say that only 19% of millennials say that people are, generally speaking, to be trusted. I mean, this is scary. I mean, from a political and social perspective, this is frightening. So, I mean, can Facebook be used to help people with trust? I mean, it was, as I say in the book, this was born, I think, the generation that grew up just after 9/11. So I think both a way to try to create trust and community from the kind of an expression of the American psyche in that sense to respond to 9/11, but also control things. And so the challenge, I think, is how do we create community? How do we create trust? And I don't think this can ultimately be done through the screen. So I would you please make up your own minds. But I think that the less time we spend on social media and the more time we spend being social is how our hearts and minds really transcend our own self-centered perspectives and really touch the broader essence of being human.
Well, there goes that position of your being a spiritual advisor, I think. What I'm wondering, in fact, is because you made a very important point about the priority being the monetization, which is in some ways kind of strange, because I don't think if he's worth, I saw somewhere $71 billion, I'm not sure what more we can out here do with $71 billion and old paltry $20, $30 billion. So I mean, so in some ways, if that is going to be a continued impetus or the continued impetus as it is a business, is there at some point a kind of almost an antithetical spirit by virtue of that being a priority? So yeah, compassion teams are great so long as they make money, kind of. I mean, that's the most simple way to look at that.
Right.
So I'm wondering then if that's
sure. I mean, if you say you're all about creating community, but you really want to keep people on Facebook as long as possible, I think that's kind of a contradiction.
Yeah.
And maybe Facebook can be a springboard for the real world, and some people do use it that way. So I welcome people to to find their own adaptation to social media, and that's the key. Is this is in the world. So what is your adaptation to it? And you have to take that bull by the horns and really come down on and make active decisions about how you use it. So maybe that would be something I would say. And how can you help people make active decisions about how to use social media? Because as the research shows, the more time you spend on social media, the more depressed, the more anxious, the more lonely, and the more suicidality there is.
Wow.
So, I mean, this is a profoundly, negative influence, or can be, and is largely. I mean, there was recently one of our psychologist colleagues wrote the article, Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation? Jean Twenge, who just came out with the book iGen. And, there are some positive things that smartphones and social media have done, but, on the whole, we have to deal with all those negatives. And so if I think, as we learn, I think, through our work, relationships are transformative. And if you don't have, if you titrate your relationships to superficial chatter online, then how does that really affect your personal, human, and spiritual development? So, I mean, I guess I would wonder, how does he see his goal of connecting us all and
You have to monetize compassion.
Right, well, yeah.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah,
I remember
yeah.
over the last 30 years having several conversations with people about the environment and saying, well, save the environment when we can make money doing it. And I assume that the solar industry is thriving on that basis today. We're a long way from where we need to be. How could we monetize? I'm not asking you this question. How could we monetize compassion?
Yeah, that's
Sell 10,000 copies of Facebuddha.
Or is it inherently antithetical?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think, we all, we're people in the mental health business. We monetize it in a sense because we get paid for what we do to care for people. I think people working in nonprofits and other, and even business, I think they can find a way of saying we're trying to help people. But I mean, and we're making money from it, sure. But I mean, I think we all have to engage in a process of self-reflection. What am I, doing? But this is if you get to the end of my book, I mean, I talk about this dichotomy of intentions in the world and how we get at the heart and how do we cultivate the heart, values of the heart, which I think are so underappreciated and undervalued in our country. It's all about wealth, status, and possessions. I mean, look at what's happening right now.
You might comment on your chapter about the gaslight.
Yeah, sure. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, so I do, not to give you a brief shout out to this chapter, I call it the Great Gaslight. So the gaslight is when a person is manipulated to believe something basically delusional and because the other person is basically altering facts and distorting reality. And so we have a lot of reality distortion fields in the world today. And I think for me, certainly the idea that wealth, status, and possessions are the most important things that we can aspire to is the great gaslight. And that the values of the heart are the true direction we should go in. And I think we devalue the heart in so many ways. I think that we see it devalued in the culture. It's seen as weak or soft, and I think we really have to work at it. It's hard to stay on track and to cultivate the heart, but I think that's the challenge we have, and that's what I hope in my writing in some small way. And certainly, I've been inspired by many of the people I know in this room who do that in their jobs, and in their lives every day. So I don't think it's not present, but we haven't quite gotten over the finish line yet, so to speak. Any other questions or comments?
The Great Gaslight to me, I think I may have taken the wrong message away, but it was like, it's hard work to be humble and vulnerable. And that should count as work and something in the world. And the gaslight, I think, is the American way of having everything bright and beautiful and happy all the time. And if you come at life complete with ambivalence and complete with vulnerability, some people make you look like a chump. And that's when the heavy lifting of humility takes place.
Right, absolutely. I think the value of being vulnerable. I mean, that's not American, right? It's only recently Brene Brown and some other folks talking about vulnerability has kind of made that prominent. Wealth, status, possessions, they give us this sense of security. Which I think there are a lot of side effects to that, because if we just pushing for those, then we can make other people very insecure in our own monomaniacal drives. So I think the idea that we're all vulnerable, we all share the same earth, and if we can all just keep that recognition in our minds, that we don't, and I think one of the ways that even people who care very deeply devalue the heart is potentially in getting stuck in anger and more worse than that, hostility, and then you do devalue the heart and you become polarized. And so I think the challenge in this country is, how do we create empathy across differing opinions, and how do we try to be vulnerable with each other? There have been so many events that just in the last 2 months, I can't recall a time when the world has gone through so much to press us to the point of vulnerability. And maybe there's this message that we still need to really focus on. But yeah, this is about how we connect to the heart and connect to the heart of all. I think I saw a question in the back. Pete?
I just wondering, maybe I made something at home on that, to explore and talk about it all, expressing that kind of emotion and ideas through something other than your voice. You talk to person to person, you smile. lot going on. It's a real communication, a very broad and deep sense. Do you ever explore what it means to try and do that through a medium so actually impersonal, like Facebook, because you don't see the person unless they attach pictures?
Right, and there's actually been some work on this. So what I call this, what we're doing here, and what we do in conversation is embodied presence. And we get all the tone of voice, facial expression, body language, all of that comes through. And it brings you closer, and the mirror neurons work. And so you feel with the other person as well. But online, of course, you lose all those cues. And at the extreme, we get what's called cyber disinhibition, which is where the trolling and they've done studies about the folks who troll, and a significant percentage of them are actually sadistic. And so they without the presence of another person, people say things that they would never say to another person face to face. So I think this is why, and then once you activate that circuit, that what we could call the primitive brain, or the amygdala, which is the kind of very reactive, threat sensing part of our brains. If we keep activating those circuits, we lose the circuits from the higher brain, which are responsible for long-term planning, for compassion, and for regulating those impulses and so forth. And so then we're stuck in a negative loop. And so that's why I think that we're kind of I call social media the auxiliary amygdala. It's what we connects right to the back of our brain, and then we just get all worked up and sometimes angry and crazy and all of this, and we sense threat and we feel like we have to react. But how do we go from reaction to response and connection? And that's what I'm looking for. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It's good discussion.
Okay. All right, thank you. I see another question. Was it Eileen or no? Yes.
I have a question about your title.
Yes.
I'm neither a Buddhist nor a psychoanalyst, so could you just first define what transcendence is? And I'd like you to really go into detail. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste like? How does one know if one is transcending? And then the other part of the title is something that gets in the way of social media gets in the way of that.
Okay. So let's take the whole title first. And so Facebuddha obviously was a pun on Facebook, Facebuddha instead. And transcendence, well, the way I use it is transcending or rising above the self-centered ego, which contains hatred, greed, and other self-centered delusions. So transcending this to a broader communion, I think, with the big S self, the larger than the individual self. And so that's the basic idea. Now, Maslow used it. Many of you might be familiar with his, the work that is most popular is the self-actualization. So you have the hierarchy of needs, and at the top of the pyramid, there's self-actualization. Well, in his later work, he said, there's actually a level beyond that, which is actually transcending the self entirely. So that's what I refer to. So really, I kind of use it in my way as kind of synonymous with enlightenment, or transcending, or eliminating hatred, greed, and self-centeredness. And for me anyway, I feel I can approach that mostly when I'm trying to connect to others, when I'm in relationship to them. I can let myself go and just be part of the all, so to speak. And certainly the book that I was working on, Going to Peace, the subtitle was going to be Traveling to Transcendence, because I also felt like I gradually slipped into this kind of sense of being a human being without an identity as doctor or person who lives in this way. I was just a human being walking the earth with 7 billion other human beings, and so was able to approach some kind of transcendence in this kind of appointmentless time, which happens when you're traveling. and just connecting with whatever comes up. So that's my sense of it. But I'm sure there's plenty of discussion on that topic. Yeah. Yes, Stephen.
I don't know if there's a question in here, Ravi. I must say, so I haven't read the book yet, but I couldn't help but sort of see that in the beginning sections you are reprinting or quoting from Memoirs of a Superfan. You know, I've admired the role that you play in being our superfans. So those of you who don't know, we have an annual film festival, and for what, like 11, 12 years, steadily,
Yep,
you have written at least a dozen blogs, lengthy blogs, reviewing films at the festival. And it occurs to me that what I love about them always is that they're so rich in a combination. It's not like someone just saying, these films are great, you should see this one. You find themes that connect them, and there's always these larger themes of community and what a deeper meaning of what it means to come together. And then there's also something very personal in your own work, as I've come to understand it over the years. I'm just wondering, maybe you can find something. Are you placing them in there? What role does film and reviewing film and watching a film in a film festival setting, or an Asian American film in particular? You know, could you have done this? Do you write also when you go to other film festivals? Or do you approach this notion of identity and community and this discovery of what our own cultural connections might be to our, you know, to being Asian American? I'm just wondering what part of that plays in the development of the book.
Well, CamFest has been just an extraordinary part of the life of the community for so many years, and it's changed my life. I mean, part of the reason I went into psychiatry was because I realized how powerful stories were, and how you could watch a film and watch somebody transform over the course of 90 minutes. But every year, as you know, I take off most of the week of CamFest and just immerse myself in films and write about them. And I'm so grateful to Cam for allowing me to do that for this time, because that is also a transcendent and spiritual experience as well. Travel, but also writing about film. The film festival, through 100 films, takes us around the world. We really get to forget about our own stories, but really pay attention to the world and take in the world in a very deep and profound and, yes, spiritual way that is transcendent. And so I think it always brings up this quality of who are we together? Who are we in relation to each other? And that always has an impact. Well, who am I? If there's this relation to the world, if all these stories are speaking to us, well, who are we to be now? And so I again, everybody, if you haven't gone to CamFest, just please take the week off and see all these films. And I think it's really transformative. And so thank you for your work, and everybody from Cam who's here for supporting the festival and all the work you do year round. So thank you.
Rob, I wanted to say one thing about transcendence from a psychoanalytic point of view. It's rather less lofty, but I wanted to direct myself to your question. In the analytic sense, psychoanalytic sense, transcendence is the process whereby we move from one conscious attitude to another. Sounds simple, I know. But if you stop and consider, the organism, the culture, everything is always in motion. So a conscious mind is forever in transcendence. That doesn't sound as lofty, but it's just as big a challenge.
So we're always kind of evolving a new consciousness, which supersedes the preceding consciousness. And I think this is about taking into account the opposites, transcending the opposites, and bringing yourself to a new level of harmony and organization. So hopefully, we can do this in society as well. I think I saw a hand back there. Oh, Deanne. Yes, hi, thank you. Yes, thank you for coming.
My question is
Yeah, the most challenging parts. Well, I think probably the hardest parts to reckon with were the memoir parts, because I really kind of have to, really turn the spotlight back in and say what's going on, and I had this at times difficult experience in India, which you'll read about. That's the biggest chapter in the book, called Origins, Migrations, and Pilgrimages, and so that's really contending with the difficult parts of relationship, so I think, trying to understand what was happening. I felt like I had a movie camera going on in my mind as I was traveling through that experience, but also as I was looking back on it. So I think that was the memoir parts were most difficult. Yeah. All right. So. Any other questions, or? Yeah. Does anybody have any? How many people here are on Facebook pretty regularly? I see about half of the hands, I think. A third to a half of the hands. Okay. All right. And so would you say you're enthusiastic about Facebook? How many people are enthusiastic about Facebook? Or all right, at least one person is. A few people are enthusiastic. I've heard one person called a social media queen already. So maybe I'll ask you about what that's like to be anointed. But so some people enthusiastic, and are other people? Do you find yourself ambivalent about Facebook at times? Do you notice times? Yeah. So several, and I think that's probably the most common position. People, like something about it. They stay involved for something, whether it's the events or catching up with their friends, or friends or family from a distant location. Sure. So those are all positive things. But then there's the ambivalence, and so that's as we talked about ambivalence, this is what I try to explore and try to really work through. If something has both good and bad, what's my intention with it? So, Oh, sorry, Isabel. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if you told me that, or I heard for somebody else, but from that, for somebody who wants to write about wants some evidence about Facebook, but I think in order to be published by the publisher, you need to have 1,000 Facebook friends in order to even start to have a publisher to work with you. Is that correct? I mean, that's not
yes. Well, I had one agent tell me, I don't work with authors unless they have 50,000 Twitter followers or more. I'm like, you don't have time to write if you got that many Twitter followers. I suppose there's some popular writers who accumulate those as well. We know that Nguyen, I'm sure he has more than 50,000. But interestingly, he just took a break from Facebook, I guess, because he said he has to write. So clearly there's some things which take precedence over our time on Facebook, which can be an hour to 2 hours a day for some people. And so, how does this displacement? So we've all got the same time per day. How does this displacement work with the rest of your life? So that can be an ambivalence. Yes, Bruce.
I get one more question.
Sure,
Sorry.
please.
What is your understanding? I mean, that's, speaking of clinician, a kind of interesting correlation about the increase in anxious and depressive symptoms. It seems almost proportional to time spent on Facebook. What are the going theories that explain this? I mean, listening to it, I have some in the back of my mind, but I think you've probably given this a lot more thought, and I'd be interested in your thoughts about that correlation.
So I think the big problem here is 2 words: social comparison. It makes us unhappy, So I think that's the main cause. And also, we get online for two reasons: belonging, two main reasons: a sense of belonging, and also self-expression. And so you can do that. But there's also curiosity about the medium and so forth. But at least for the short term, studies have shown people can feel emotionally close, can feel a sense of belonging, but it tends to fade. And then the problems with social comparison come up. And also, just the fact is, I think we all, when we're craving belonging, we just fall just short of that, I think, with the online experience. I mean, we can get it in little pieces and feel good. Oh, we commented back and forth and we shared this moment. But that sense of real belonging, I think, is not present. So I think that erodes us too. But social comparison is really the big danger point. I have a whole chapter about that. So
Great.
Yeah, yeah. I think I saw another hand back there. Did I? Oh yes, Abigail.
I'm a little bit worried because the ambivalence just isn't something that, again, I'm being self-centered, so I'm not transcending here. But,
No.
I don't have that ambivalence so much, and in fact, it's been a positive experience for me as someone who's very introverted and has difficulty, or just kind of situation and trying to push actions of people. So in success failure you talked about, it seems to me, for me anyway, and this is going to sound so corny, but it is something that I find energizing and inspiring. When my friends are succeeding and achievements that they're posting, I feel like, okay, I'm amongst a group that's succeeding too. But I'm just worried, is there something I'm missing if I don't have that?
No, I mean, I think we're talking about a cultural phenomena, so, everybody's going to have their own experience with it, and that's why, I don't try to make up anybody's mind about Facebook. I just kind of give my experience and talk about the psychological research, which may resonate with you or give you a new way to look at this, but I think, ultimately we all, make our own adaptation to it, but I think the whole point is bringing mindfulness and compassion to your experience, and, I think that is another way to reframe social comparison, is to admire and to be inspired by. So that can be fine. So I mean, it sounds like you've worked to an adaptation which is useful for you. I'd be curious to see what you say after you read my book. I mean, obviously 1.2 billion people a day are not, not totally unhappy with everything about Facebook. But I think, 70% of the adults and teens in the country are on Facebook, and 1.2 billion people around the world log in daily. And but I think that there is, at least a significant percentage of those, I think, if I understand people, if I understand the psychological research that's been done about it, are either ambivalent or they have periods of frustration, or they're just not quite sure. And I think we're all reaching for this sense of connection and belonging. And Facebook surfaces, and Twitter, and social media surfaces the problem of belonging, but it doesn't solve it. And so, how do we really approach true belonging and true community, and even the beloved community? Thich Nhat Hanh says the next Buddha will be the Sangha or community. In some sense, your Facebook friends are a community, so they can inform and entertain and inspire you, and that's all positive. But what are we really looking for? And I think that's a question which we all, at this time in the life of our city and our nation and world, really have to, see what can really, how do we find belonging for ourselves? How do we create belonging for others? And I think that's the real question for me. I don't have the answer to that, but I think for me, the answer lies in more commitment to the real world. Viet. Oh yes, by the way, Viet is sitting back there. He designed the cover, so thank you, Viet, for designing the cover. Viet
I was just wondering about reconciling spirituality and activism, because spirituality can be somewhat of an esoteric practice, and then activism sometimes can be, reactionary or engaged in, anger. And I think, you're one of the good embodiments of, spiritual activism in a way. I read the book, but.
Yeah, so, I think, probably we get active around things which are threatening to us as individuals, as a community, and so forth. So, reactions aren't necessarily bad, but they do happen. But, I think ultimately what we're working for, what I would be working for, is a real community. It's not a sense of overpowering, for me anyway. It's not a sense of one side overpowering another side with anger and with intensity, but rather allowing us all to experience our humanity. And I think that's through the challenge of love, And so I think that's for me. And obviously I've been inspired by the same people you could probably name also in terms of this philosophy of love and really. Even loving your enemies. I mean, this is some, I talked about this with some young activists, and they said, isn't that asking us to do emotional labor? And okay, maybe that's one way to look at it, but I feel like all life is emotional labor, and the question is, how do you relate to the task of being a human being with other human beings? And one of my blog posts earlier this year, which I wrote and then I read to a group of writers and activists, and I wanted their feedback because I thought that if I posted this, I would literally get tomatoes thrown at me. I just thought that this was back in late January, early February. I wrote a blog after many months of meditation and really struggling with the election of Donald Trump, called Compassion for Trump. So, so hopefully nobody's going to throw my book at me right now. But how to have compassion for somebody who's been so damaging and so hurtful. But for me, anyway, it was empowering to connect to a place of understanding of his inner life, or what there is of his inner life. Perhaps his insecurity or so forth that drives him to proclaim his popularity and all these things. So really seeing underneath the bluster to the human being underneath was a way of feeling a sense of compassion, and I felt no longer submerged by an oppressive force. Although we are all still kind of in that state, but at least psychologically it was a turning point for me. So I don't know. I think compassion and love can be very empowering.
Well, just to get back to your questions, how do you create community, and then you don't have an answer for it. I just want to say, as a member of the community, I just want to mirror to you that I've seen you for years being so open and so supportive of other organizations, other communities, Asian American. I know you've been going to our events, Vietnamese community, cultural communities, and you always, you're just very present, and you listen, and you can feel you have this open heart. So I think you double it, and then you're doing really well, because you have a very different. The reason everybody is here, because you do have a very strong presence because of who you are, and so it's in another forum when you put it into words, but your way of being really does what it's searching for, and I just want to mirror that.
Oh, thank you so much, Isabella. It's very touching, and I feel like an ant crawling behind giants, because Isabella has done so much for a community, and starting the diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network, and writing books, and being in the community, and just using so much time. So let me mirror that back to you. So I feel like maybe I've done a little, a few grains of rice, but you've cooked a few pots. So yes, thank you. All right. Yes, anyone else? Yes, sure.
Yes. So I wonder in the future, are you interested in comparing different social media in the world, like WeChat in China, WhatsApp? I find like I use WeChat a lot because I keep that connection, because my family and lots of friends are there. I actually do not go to Facebook very often because I only have so much time. But I find them different, interestingly different.
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, most of the research has been done on Facebook and some on Instagram, and very little on the other social networks. There is one study that was done on Weibo, which I quote, and that was a study about how anger moves virally through social networks. But that was done on Weibo, and so anger moved more dramatically and more quickly than any other emotion. So that's been done, but I think you're right. I mean, every social. I mean, there's so many social networks that there's Path, which is just for less than 50 people. There's Couple, just for you and your partner. So there's all these iterations, and I mean, I'm sure, like you said, some of them do support in real world relationships and support people who are separated by oceans and so forth. So, not all bad. But I guess maybe you could tell me after you read my book, how the two compare.
Yeah, I mean, WeChat actually, I feel WeChat somehow is more calming. I don't know why. Also, honestly, lots of issues in China or whatever.
I haven't read this book, but Zeynep Tufekci, I can pronounce that correctly, just wrote a book called Of Twitter and Tear Gas. And so I think her conclusions are, from what I've read, are kind of similar to mine, is that there's a lot of excitement about these social media as a way of advancing social causes, but it really ultimately all depends on the relationships, and that social media protests can be this big flare online, but without the supporting real world relationships, they can not kind of take root. And so that's where I think we have to return to the real world. I mean, we talk about the Facebook revolution, for example, and I'm not an expert, but going by people who have lived it or who have experienced it, I mean, it really depended on many years of groundwork that were done in organizations that before it took off on Facebook with Wael Gonim and so forth. So it was really not really the Facebook revolution. Facebook and Twitter supplied important supply lines, but it was really about the relationships of the people and to a place, Tahrir Square. So I think ultimately we still have to say what's the impact on real world relationships and so forth. So.
Yeah, I agree with it. I mean, also there is that group dynamics and the individual relationships played out on the WeChat social media too. That which is very interesting. How a group will evolve into a certain type of group, and because I'm on different groups, and it's very interesting to watch their dynamics.
So you sense the evolution through what people share, or?
What people share and how people react to each other. I'm sure. I mean, I have to read your book. And
how many people do you communicate with on WeChat?
Actually, this is just basically the only tool I'm using to connect with my family.
But what's a typical? So it's just like how many? I mean, Facebook. I think the average is about 400 friends. So what's the comparison for WeChat?
WeChat, I mean, depending on who you are. I only connect with a relatively small group of people that I truly connected to.
Yeah, so that's your adaptation.
It's just, it's mostly purely for that.
So I didn't mean to put you on the spot for how many people you connect with, but I mean, I think there's a difference. I mean, some people have up to 5,000 friends on Facebook, and so that's obviously by necessity a fairly superficial interaction with people. I mean, it can be helpful in some ways, but yeah. So I mean, I think they're all. That's what I get to. How would mindfulness and compassion help you adapt, find your distance or engagement with the social network?
Right.
So that's,
Also, that I think what I want to bring up one more thing is the effect of censorship
uh-huh.
on those two different social media, because WeChat face really very strict censorship.
Right, and that's that is a problem,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
it is.
very clearly in
It is a
China.
problem.
Right.
Yeah, it is, and nothing is completely black and white. It is, on one hand, it's a huge problem. On the other hand, it alters people's behavior.
The more power you give to the medium, the less power you have. So yeah, I think this is a problem.
I mean, I agree with that, but I think it's multi-layered change of behavior. But that's a bigger, longer conversation.
Yeah. Well, I hope this book is a conversation starter for people. I certainly don't in any way think that it's that I've said everything that's to be said about social media or about relationship or about transcendence or anything. But I hopefully I'll provide a good starting point to think about these issues.
It's a wonderful starting point.
So, yeah. Anybody else or yes. Yes.
Earlier, you mentioned that you meditate 45 minutes a day. I would like to ask, so how does meditation impact you, like in the area of work and relationship?
Well, I think it helps me deal with life, for one thing. So I always feel like I'm building and cultivating a reservoir of patience and being able to not get tied to a reaction or reactionary engagement with people, but or with my own thoughts even, but have that reservoir of mindfulness to look at the stories that come up and just watch them, and hopefully be better at diffusing them if they're if they're not accurate. So that's the main thing. But I'm also cultivating loving kindness and compassion as part of my practice as well. So yeah.
Thank you.
How about you? Do you meditate or?
Yeah, well, I just started.
Okay, great. Have you found some positive effects?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Great. All right. Yeah. Any other questions or? All right. Well, thank you so much. Really is heartwarming. So it's a bit like almost like being at your own funeral. I said earlier. We had a bit of a wake, and so kind of gave me that. But hopefully it'll be better than that. I'll have a rebirth. So thank you. And I think there's still plenty of food and drink. So please mingle, and I'll talk to you more. All right. Thank you so much.